The bell above Murphy's gun and tactical chimed as Victoria Price stepped inside, her worn leather boots silent against the concrete floor despite her purposeful stride. The afternoon sun streaming through the storefront windows caught the silver. Threads woven through her dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail that revealed the weathered tan lines around her eyes, the kind earned from years of squinting through scopes under harsh conditions. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Behind the glass counter, Danny Murphy looked up from cleaning a disassembled Glock, his thick fingers pausing mid-motion as he took in the woman before him. She wasn't what he typically expected when customers inquired about precision rifles. Most were weekend warriors with more money than skill, or hunters looking to upgrade from their grandfather's .30-06. This woman moved differently, controlled, economical, like every step had been measured twice. "Help you with something?" Danny's Boston accent carried a note of polite skepticism as he set down his cleaning cloth. Victoria approached the counter with the same measured pace, her gray eyes scanning the inventory behind Danny without seeming obvious about it. She'd spent the last 3 days researching every gun store within a 50-mile radius of Boston, reading reviews, checking inventory lists, and asking discreet questions through military channels. Murphy's had the reputation she needed, and, more importantly, the connections to make certain acquisitions happen quickly and quietly. "I need an M24, she said simply, her voice carrying the flat, matter-of-fact tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Danny's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. The M24 sniper weapon system wasn't something you picked up for deer hunting or backyard target shooting. Based on the Remington 700, it was military-grade precision equipment, the kind of rifle that came with a reputation and a price tag to match. In his 15 years running the shop, he'd sold maybe 3 of them, all to serious collectors or former military personnel who treated the weapons like religious artifacts. "That's a pretty specific request," Danny said carefully, studying Victoria's face for tells. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with the kind of lean build that suggested regular physical training rather than gym membership. Her hands, resting casually on the counter, showed old calluses in telling places, trigger finger, support thumb, the edge of her palm where it would grip a stock. Still, he'd learned not to make assumptions. "You military?" "Was." The single word carried weight, but Victoria didn't elaborate. She'd learned long ago that the less information she volunteered, the fewer complications arose later. "I assume you can source one?" Danny nodded slowly, his mental calculator already running numbers. An M24 in good condition would run close to $8,000, not counting the optics package that usually came with such requests. The margin would be decent, but something about the woman's demeanor suggested this wasn't a casual purchase. His survival instincts, honed by years of operating on the edge of Boston's gray market firearms trade, were sending mixed signals. "I can make some calls," he said. "But I gotta ask, what's the application? Target shooting? Collection piece?" Victoria's lips curved into what might have been called a smile if it had reached her eyes. She'd anticipated this question, prepared several plausible answers during her drive over. Competition shooting, long-range hunting, even collecting all would have been acceptable responses that would move the conversation toward logistics and pricing. Instead, she decided on honesty. "I made a shot at 1,847 meters with one in Afghanistan," she said quietly, watching Danny's reaction carefully. 3 years ago, outside Kandahar. "I need to get back to that level of precision, and I need to do it quickly." The numbers hit Danny like a physical blow. 1,847 meters over a mile. The M24's effective range was listed at 800 meters under ideal conditions, with most shooters struggling to maintain accuracy beyond 600. What this woman was claiming wasn't just impressive. It was pushing the absolute limits of what the platform could achieve. It would require not just exceptional skill, but perfect conditions, custom ammunition, and a kind of mathematical precision that separated professional snipers from everyone else who simply knew how to pull a trigger. Danny started, then stopped, reconsidering his words. Either this woman was lying, which seemed unlikely given the casual way she delivered the information, or he was looking at someone whose capabilities existed in a completely different category than his usual customers. That's one hell of a shot. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Danny caught something in her eyes, a flicker of memory, that suggested the shot hadn't been taken under ideal circumstances. The kind of memory that left marks deeper than weather lines and calluses. The conditions weren't optimal, Victoria continued, her voice maintaining that same level tone. Crosswind at 15 to 20 knots. Temperature differential between firing position and target area, and the target was ... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Mobile. Danny felt his mouth go dry. A moving target at over a mile, in wind conditions that would challenge most shooters at half that distance. He'd heard stories from the sandbox, tales that sounded too outrageous to be true, but usually involved special operations personnel whose names never appeared in official records. Looking at Victoria Price, if that was even her real name, he was beginning to suspect he might be meeting one of those legends in person. Jesus Christ, he muttered, then caught himself. Sorry, ma'am, it's just ... That's the kind of shot that makes careers. Hell, that's the kind of shot that wins wars. Victoria's hand moved unconsciously to her left shoulder, fingers pressing against a spot where Danny could just make out the edge of what looked like an old scar through her jacket. The gesture was brief, automatic, the kind of movement people made when their bodies remembered pain their minds tried to forget. It ended one, she said simply. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of traffic from the street outside, and the soft hum of the shop's fluorescent lights. Danny found himself reassessing everything about the woman standing across from him. The way she positioned herself with clear lines of sight to both the front door and the back exit. The way her eyes had cataloged every weapon in the display cases without seeming to look directly at any of them. The casual mention of a shot that belonged in military record books, delivered like she was ordering coffee. I can have an M24A2. Here by Friday, Danny said finally. Leupold Mark IV optics, Harris bipod, the whole package. But I gotta ask why now? If you've been out for a while. Victoria had been expecting this question too, but the answer was more complicated then. She wanted to share with a stranger, even one who was proving more perceptive than she'd anticipated. The truth involved a phone call 3 days ago from someone she'd hoped never to hear from again. A voice from her past carrying news that had turned her carefully constructed civilian life upside down and reminded her that some debts never truly got paid in full. Someone I served with is in trouble, she said instead, which was true enough. The kind of trouble that requires very specific skills to resolve. Danny nodded as if this made perfect sense, which in his world it probably did. Boston's underground firearms trade attracted people whose problems couldn't be solved through conventional channels. He'd learned not to ask too many questions about why someone needed particular capabilities, focusing instead on ensuring his customers got exactly what they required to handle their situations effectively. You'll need ammunition, he said, transitioning into business mode. Factory loads won't give you the precision you're talking about. I know a guy who does custom loads, match-grade components, works with some of the serious competition shooters. And ... other professionals. Good, Victoria said. I'll also need range time somewhere I can stretch it out to at least 1,000 meters, preferably more. Private range, minimal questions asked. Danny's grin was the first genuinely warm expression she'd seen from him. Now you're talking my language. There's a place about an hour north of here, up in the mountains. Guy who owns it used to run sniper schools for various government agencies before he retired. He's got ranges marked out to 1,500 meters. All the wind flags and environmental monitoring equipment you could want. Costs extra, but it sounds like money isn't your primary concern. It's not, Victoria confirmed. She reached into her jacket and produced a roll of bills thick enough to make Danny's eyes widen. I need everything ready by Friday, and I need to be shooting by Saturday morning. Can you make that happen? Danny nodded, already mentally composing the phone calls he'd need to make. I can make it happen. But can I ask you something? Victoria waited. That shock you mentioned, the 1,847-meter one. What was the wind call? The question surprised Victoria, not because it was unexpected, but because it demonstrated that Danny understood enough about long-range shooting to ask the right questions. Wind reading at extreme distance was as much art as science, requiring shooters to interpret multiple environmental factors simultaneously while accounting for the bullet's flight time through constantly changing conditions. Primary wind at the firing position was 12 knots from 7 o'clock. Victoria said, the technical details coming back with crystal clarity despite the years that had passed. But there were 3 distinct wind layers between my position and the target. The middle layer was running nearly perpendicular to the primary, and the final 200 meters had thermal updrafts from the valley floor that were shifting every 30 to 40 seconds. Danny whistled low. How many rounds to get your dope? 1, Victoria said quietly. I didn't have the luxury of multiple attempts. The weight of that statement settled between them. In the controlled environment of a shooting range, precision. Shooters might fire dozens of rounds to perfect their data, making minute adjustments to account for every variable. In combat, especially at the distances Victoria was describing, shooters often got only one opportunity: miss and the target either disappeared or returned fire with their own long-range capabilities. 1 shot, 1 kill, Danny said, recognizing the sniper's creed. 1 shot, 1 kill, Victoria confirmed as Danny began pulling out paperwork, his movements taking on the efficient precision of someone who'd handled numerous high-value transactions. Under time pressure. I'll need some basic information for the federal forms, but I'm guessing you know how to handle that side of things. Payment method? Victoria placed the roll of bills on the counter. Cash, is that going to be a problem? Not for me, Danny said with a grin. Though I'll have to report anything over 10 grand to the feds. Standard procedure. The rifle and optics package will be under that threshold, Victoria said. Ammunition and range time are separate transactions. Danny's respect for her operational security grew another notch. Whoever Victoria Price was, she understood how to move through the system without creating unnecessary attention. The kind of skills that came from operating in environments where mistakes had permanent consequences. As Danny began filling out the initial paperwork, Victoria let her attention wander around the shop more openly. The inventory was impressive for a civilian dealer: military surplus equipment that technically couldn't be sold to the general public, modifications that existed in legal gray areas, and accessories that suggested Danny's customer base included people whose requirements went well beyond hunting and sport shooting. Her eyes stopped on a display case containing night vision equipment, 3rd-generation tubes, thermal scopes, infrared illuminators, the kind of gear that had been standard issue during her time in the sandbox, but would cost a civilian more than most people's annual salary. Next to the night vision were communications equipment and GPS units, all civilian variants of military hardware she recognized from her operational days. You run a different kind of gun shop, Victoria observed. Danny looked up from the paperwork, following her gaze to the specialized equipment. I cater to a specialized clientele. People who need the best available equipment for demanding applications. Government contracts? Some, also private military contractors, executive protection specialists, competitive shooters who take their sport very seriously. Danny's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to elaborate on client specifics. The line between military and civilian applications gets pretty blurry in this business. Victoria nodded, understanding the dynamics. After leaving the military, many skilled personnel found themselves working in the gray areas between official government operations and purely civilian activities. Private security, corporate risk management, specialized consulting, all fields that required military-grade capabilities but operated outside traditional command structures. "What about training?" Victoria asked. "Beyond just range time, I may need to refresh some skills that have gotten rusty." Danny's pen paused above the form. "What kind of skills?" "Urban environments, moving targets, multiple objectives in complex terrain." Victoria's voice remained level, but Danny caught the slight tension that entered her posture. "The kind of scenarios where one shot, one kill becomes one shot, everything depends on it." The shop's bell chimed again as another customer entered, breaking the intensity of the conversation. Danny looked up to see a regular and older gentleman who collected World War II weapons and visited every few weeks to browse the historical pieces. The timing couldn't have been worse, but customer service was customer service. "Mrs. Price, if you don't mind waiting a few minutes, I need to help Mr. Peterson here. But I think I know someone who can address your training requirements. Someone who understands the kind of scenarios you're describing." Victoria nodded and moved away from the counter, giving Danny space to help his other customer while she continued examining the shop's inventory. But her mind wasn't really focused on the weapons and equipment surrounding her. Instead, she was thinking about the phone call that had brought her here, the voice from her past that had shattered 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy. "Victoria, it's Marcus. I need your help." Marcus Webb, her former spotter, the man who'd shared countless hours in hide positions across Afghanistan's unforgiving landscape, who'd provided the environmental data and target intelligence that made her impossible shots possible. The man who'd been beside her when she'd taken the shot that ended her military career, though not in the way most people would expect. Marcus had always been the steady one, the professional who never let personal feelings interfere with operational requirements. If he was reaching out after 3 years of silence, asking for help in a voice that carried notes of desperation she'd never heard from him before, then something had gone very, very wrong. The conversation with Mr. Peterson concluded, and Danny returned his attention to Victoria, who was now studying a tactical map of the local area mounted on the wall behind the counter. "That shows all the private ranges within driving distance," Danny explained. "The one I mentioned is here." He pointed to a location about 60 miles north of the city. "Granite Ridge Precision Training. The owner's name is Colonel James Harrison, retired Army Special Operations. He's worked with people who have your particular background." Victoria studied the location, mentally calculating drive times and sight lines from the surrounding terrain. The map showed the range was situated in a valley with natural backstops extending beyond 2,000 meters, surrounded by state forest land that would provide privacy and minimize civilian interference. "He's expecting my call?" Victoria asked. "I'll reach out to him this afternoon. Let him know you might be interested in some specialized training time. He's pretty selective about clients, but I think your credentials will speak for themselves." Victoria turned away from the map, her decision made. "Make the call. Tell him I need range time starting Saturday, possibly extending through the following week, depending on how quickly I can get back to operational standards." "Operational standards," Danny repeated, as if testing how the phrase sounded. "Can I ask what happened to take you out of the operational world?" "Injury?" Victoria's hand moved to her shoulder again, that unconscious gesture that spoke of old pain and older memories. "Something like that." Danny recognized the deflection and didn't push. In his experience, people with Victoria's background often carried scars that went deeper than physical injuries. The transition from military to civilian life was difficult under the best circumstances. For someone whose military service had involved the kind of precision shooting she was describing, the adjustment to a world without clearly defined enemies and objectives could be devastating. The paperwork will be ready for your signature on Friday, Danny said, returning to business. Rifle, optics, ammunition, and I'll have Colonel Harrison's contact information ready as well. Is there a number where I can reach you if any issues come up? Victoria pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. The card was simple, professional. Victoria Price, Risk Management Consulting, with a phone number and email address. No company logo, no elaborate design, the kind of card that said everything and nothing at the same time. Risk management, Danny said, reading the card. That covers a lot of territory. It does. Victoria picked up her jacket from the counter where she'd set it during their conversation. Friday afternoon good for pickup? Perfect. I'll have everything ready. Danny extended his hand, and Victoria shook it with the firm, brief grip of someone accustomed to making quick assessments and moving on. Mrs. Price? That shot you mentioned, the 1,847-meter one. I've never asked a customer this before, but ... was it worth it? Victoria paused at the question, her hand on the shop's door handle. For a moment, Danny thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear her over the shop's ambient noise. Ask me again after I finish. What I'm starting. The bell chimed as she left, and Danny watched through the storefront windows as Victoria walked to a nondescript sedan parked at the curb. No rental car markings, no dealer plates, the kind of vehicle they could belong to anyone and would be forgotten 5 minutes after being seen. She drove away with the same measured precision she'd displayed throughout their conversation, checking mirrors and scanning intersections, like someone whose survival had once depended on such habits. Danny looked down at the business card Victoria had left behind, turning it over in his fingers. Risk Management Consulting. In the specialized world he operated in, that could mean anything from corporate security to asset recovery to the kind of problem-solving that required capabilities most people preferred not to think about. His phone rang, interrupting his speculation. The caller ID showed a number he recognized, one of his ammunition suppliers, a craftsman who loaded custom rounds for the most demanding applications. Danny, the voice on the other end said without preamble, I just got a call from someone asking about very specific loads for an M24. Match-grade components, precision that would make most competitive shooters weep. They mentioned your name. Danny smiled despite himself. Victoria Price worked fast, and apparently understood that the best equipment meant nothing without ammunition manufactured to the same exacting standards. Yeah, I've got a customer with some pretty specific requirements. Can you handle it? I can handle it, but Danny, this person knew things about ballistics and environmental variables that suggest a very high level of training. We're not talking about weekend warrior stuff here. No, Danny agreed, thinking about Victoria's casual mention of her record shot, the way she'd cataloged his shop's contents without appearing to look, the unconscious tactical awareness she'd displayed throughout their conversation. We're definitely not talking about weekend warrior stuff. After hanging up, Danny pulled out his Rolodex and found Colonel Harrison's number. The conversation would be interesting. Harrison had worked with special operations personnel for most of his career, but even he might be surprised by the capabilities Victoria Price claimed to possess. As Danny dialed, he found himself wondering what kind of trouble could bring someone with Victoria's skills back into the operational world after 3 years of civilian life. In his experience, people with those capabilities usually stayed retired unless something threatened what mattered most to them. Or unless someone they cared about needed the kind of help that could only be provided at Distances measured in kilometers, and solutions measured in fractions of seconds. The phone rang twice before Harrison answered, his voice carrying the crisp professionalism of someone who'd never really retired from military service, just changed his area of operations. "Colonel Harrison, this is Danny Murphy down in Boston. I've got a potential client for your specialized training programs. Former military, exceptional long-range capabilities, needs to get back to operational standards quickly." "How exceptional?" Harrison asked. Danny looked at Victoria's business card again, remembering the quiet confidence with which she'd described an impossible shot under combat conditions. "Colonel, I think you're going to want to clear your schedule." Victoria drove through Boston's afternoon traffic with the kind of patience that comes from years of waiting for the perfect moment to take action. Her mind wasn't on the congestion around her, but on the conversation she just completed and the larger picture it represented. Danny Murphy had proven more perceptive and better connected than her initial research had suggested, which was both an advantage and a potential complication. The sedan's interior was sparse, functional, no personal items that might provide information about the driver, no distinctive features that would make the vehicle memorable to witnesses. Victoria had learned long ago that operational security began with the smallest details and extended to every aspect of how she moved through the world. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text message. She waited until reaching a red light before checking it, though she already knew who would be contacting her. Package confirmed for Friday. Training contact established. Additional resources available if required. DM Victoria deleted the message and put the phone away. Danny Murphy's efficiency was impressive, but it also suggested connections and capabilities that went beyond what most civilian firearms dealers possessed. She filed that information away for future reference, along with her assessment of his shop's specialized inventory and his familiarity with the kind of customer she represented. The light turned green, and Victoria continued her journey across the city toward a hotel, where she'd registered under a name that would disappear from all records within 48 hours of her departure. The careful anonymity wasn't paranoia, it was standard operational procedure for someone whose civilian life depended on maintaining clear separation from her previous career. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was the ringtone she'd assigned to the contact that had started this entire sequence of events. Victoria pulled into a parking garage and found a space on the second level, away from other vehicles and security cameras, before answering. "Marcus." "Victoria, thank God. I wasn't sure you'd answer." Marcus Webb's voice carried the same tension she'd heard 3 days ago, but now there was an additional note of desperation that made her chest tighten with familiar worry. During their time together in Afghanistan, she'd learned to read the subtle changes in Marcus's voice that indicated shifts in threat levels or operational complications. What she was hearing now suggested their situation had deteriorated significantly since his initial call. "Where are you?" Victoria asked. "I can't say over the phone, but I need to see you in person. There are things, complications that I couldn't explain before." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the last remnants of her civilian life slipping away with each word Marcus spoke. "How bad?" "Bad enough that they've started moving against people who were never supposed to be involved." "Victoria, they killed Jenkins last week. Made it look like a car accident, but I know better. And Henderson ... Henderson disappeared from his home in Virginia 2 days ago. No signs of struggle, but his security system was disabled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." The names hit Victoria like physical blows. Staff Sergeant Robert Jenkins and Sergeant First Class Michael Henderson had been part of their unit in Afghanistan, members of the small team that had executed the operation resulting in her record shot. If someone was targeting former team members, it meant the past she'd tried to leave behind had caught up with all of them. "Jesus, Marcus, what did you step in?" "It's not what I stepped in. It's what we all stepped in 3 years ago." That operation outside Kandahar, the one that ended with your shot. There were things about it that we weren't told. Things that are coming back to haunt everyone involved. Victoria felt her hands tighten on the steering wheel. Muscle memory from Afghanistan returning as her body prepared for threat response. The operation Marcus was referencing had been classified at the highest levels, involving target identification and elimination that had supposedly disrupted a major Taliban financial network. Her shot had taken out a high-value target, whose death had ripple effects throughout the regional command structure. "I need details," Victoria said, "not over the phone. But I need you to know that I think I'm being watched. The people we're dealing with have resources, connections in places that should be secure. They know things about that operation that suggest access to classified information." Government? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe private contractors with government connections. Maybe something else entirely. Marcus's voice carried the frustrated uncertainty of someone who'd discovered that the lines between ally and enemy were more blurred than he'd ever imagined. "All I know is that people are dying, and we're running out of time to figure out why." Victoria processed the information, her mind automatically shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through countless operations. Multiple team members targeted, sophisticated elimination methods, access to classified operational details. It painted a picture of an adversary with significant resources and inside knowledge. "Where do you want to meet?" she asked. Marcus gave her an address in western Massachusetts, a location that would provide security and privacy while remaining accessible enough for a quick meeting. "Can you be there tomorrow night?" "I'll be there." Victoria paused, considering her next words carefully. "Marcus, I'm already back in operational mode. I've acquired equipment and arranged for training time. If this is what I think it is, we're going to need every advantage we can get." "I was hoping you'd say that." The relief in Marcus's voice was palpable. "Victoria, I know asking you to come back to this isn't fair. I know what it cost you to walk away." Victoria's hand moved to her shoulder again, feeling the ridge of scar. Tissue that served as a permanent reminder of her last official operation. The injury hadn't been life-threatening, but it had been significant enough to provide a medical justification for her resignation from active duty. What the medical reports didn't reflect was that the physical wound had been the least devastating injury she'd sustained during that final mission. "We'll figure it out," she said simply. "But Marcus, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Full operational planning, complete intelligence picture, and enough firepower to handle whatever we're walking into." "Understood. And Victoria, thank you." The line went dead, leaving Victoria alone in the parking garage with the weight of decisions that would reshape her life yet again. She sat in silence for several minutes, allowing herself to fully process the transition from the civilian identity she'd carefully constructed to the operational mindset that had once defined her existence. Victoria Price, risk management consultant, had been a comfortable fiction that allowed her to use her military skills in corporate security applications while maintaining plausible distance from her previous life. Victoria Price, former Army sniper with a confirmed kill at over a mile, was a different person entirely, someone whose capabilities existed in spaces where conventional rules didn't apply. Starting tomorrow, she would need to be both versions of herself simultaneously, using civilian resources to address threats that required military solutions. It was a balancing act that would test every skill she developed during her transition to civilian life, while demanding the precision and lethality that had made her reputation in Afghanistan. Her phone buzzed with another text message. This one from Danny Murphy with contact information for Colonel Harrison and confirmation that her equipment would be ready for Friday pickup. Victoria studied the information, already planning the training schedule that would prepare her for whatever she was about to face. 3 years ago, She'd walked away from the military, believing she was leaving that life behind permanently. Now, as she started the car and drove toward her hotel, Victoria realized that some skills never really fade, they just wait dormant until circumstances require their resurrection. The question wasn't whether she could return to operational effectiveness quickly enough to help Marcus and protect the surviving members of their unit. The question was whether the person she'd become during 3 years of civilian life could coexist with the person she'd need to become to survive whatever was coming. As Victoria pulled into the hotel parking lot, she made a mental note to call her civilian employer in the morning and request extended leave for a family emergency. The lie came easily, but it felt different now than it had during her transition period. 3 years ago, she'd been desperate to distance herself from military life and embrace any fiction that facilitated that separation. Now, with former teammates dying and someone hunting the survivors of her most significant operation, the fiction felt more like operational cover than psychological denial. The distinction was subtle but important. It marked the difference between running away from her past and strategically managing how much of that past she revealed to the world. Victoria checked into her hotel room using identification that would pass casual inspection but wouldn't survive serious scrutiny, then spent an hour conducting counter-surveillance from her window to ensure she hadn't been followed from Murphy's gun shop. The precautions felt both natural and unsettling, like muscle memory returning after a long period of disuse. As she settled in for what would likely be her last quiet evening for some time, Victoria found herself thinking about the shot that had ended her military career and apparently set in motion the events that were now threatening to end her civilian life. 1,847 meters, through multiple wind layers, at a target whose elimination had strategic implications she was only now beginning to understand. One shot, one kill. But apparently, some kills had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation, creating ripple effects that could surface years later to destroy everyone involved in the original operation. Tomorrow, she would begin preparing to face those consequences. Tonight, she allowed herself a few hours to mourn the quiet life she was about to lose again. The Granite Ridge Precision Training Facility looked exactly like Victoria had expected, a collection of functional buildings situated in a valley that provided natural sound dampening and clear sight lines extending well beyond most civilian shooting ranges. As she drove through the gate on Saturday morning, Victoria could see wind flags positioned at 100-meter intervals stretching into the distance, along with the kind of environmental monitoring equipment that serious precision shooters considered essential for understanding the variables affecting long-range accuracy. Colonel James Harrison met her at the main building, and Victoria immediately recognized the bearing and assessment style of someone who'd spent decades evaluating special operations personnel. He was older than she'd expected, probably in his mid-60s, but he moved with the controlled precision of someone who maintained operational readiness despite his retirement from active duty. "Mrs. Price," Harrison said, extending his hand. "Danny Murphy spoke highly of your background. Says you have some impressive credentials." "I have some experience with precision shooting," Victoria replied, matching his firm handshake while conducting her own assessment. Harrison's eyes held the kind of intelligence that came from years of making life-and-death decisions under pressure, and his grip showed calluses consistent with someone who still spent significant time behind rifles rather than just teaching others how to use them. "Danny mentioned you made a shot at 1,847 meters in Afghanistan," Harrison said casually, as if discussing the weather. "That's the kind of distance that separates professionals from everyone else." Victoria nodded but didn't elaborate. She'd learned that claims about extreme distance shooting were often met with skepticism, and she preferred to let her actual performance speak for itself, rather than engaging in the kind of tactical storytelling that dominated many military circles. Harrison seemed to appreciate her restraint. "Well, let's see what you can do." I've got the range set up to 1,500 meters with environmental monitoring at each 100-meter mark. Winds running about 8 to 10 knots from the west, temperature stable, and humidity is lower than ideal but workable. They walked toward the firing line, where Victoria saw her M24 system waiting along with several boxes of the custom ammunition Danny's supplier had prepared. The rifle looked exactly as it should, military-grade precision equipment maintained to specifications that would satisfy the most demanding operational requirements. "Beautiful weapon," Harrison said, running an appreciative hand along the stock. "The ammunition is match grade, loaded specifically for this barrel. Your supplier knows his business." Victoria picked up the rifle, feeling the familiar weight and balance that had once been as natural to her as breathing. Muscle memory kicked in automatically as she checked the action, examined the bore, and began the systematic inspection process that preceded any precision shooting session. The rifle felt right, properly zeroed, mechanically sound, with the kind of trigger that would break cleanly at exactly the right pressure. The optics were military-grade Leupold glass that would maintain clarity and tracking consistency under the most demanding conditions. Everything Danny Murphy had promised had been delivered exactly as specified. "Before we start shooting," Harrison sighed, "I'd like to understand what you're preparing for. Danny mentioned you might need some specialized training beyond just accuracy work." Victoria paused in her equipment inspection, considering how much information she should share with someone she'd met less than 10 minutes ago. Harrison's military background and current operation suggested he was accustomed to discretion, but operational security meant revealing only what was absolutely necessary. "I may need to engage targets in complex environments," Victoria said. "Carefully. Urban settings, multiple objectives, situations where precision is critical and second chances aren't available." Harrison's expression didn't change, but Victoria caught a subtle shift in his posture that suggested increased attention. "Defensive applications? Potentially offensive as well." The admission hung between them for a moment, both understanding the implications. Harrison was being asked to provide training for someone who might need to use precision shooting capabilities in situations that went beyond self-defense or law enforcement applications. "I've worked with people in similar situations," Harrison said finally. "Government contractors, private security specialists, individuals whose circumstances require capabilities that exist in gray areas between military and civilian applications. What kind of training can you provide?" Harrison gestured toward the valley beyond the firing line. "I can provide whatever you need to be effective. Moving targets, multiple objective scenarios, urban simulation environments, stress inoculation. Training that replicates the physiological effects of high-pressure situations." Victoria felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. Harrison's matter-of-fact approach to what she was requesting suggested he understood exactly the kind of operational challenges she might be facing. The fact that he wasn't asking detailed questions about her specific situation indicated a level of professional discretion that would be essential for what she needed to accomplish. "Let's start with basic accuracy assessment," Victoria said. "I need to know where my skills stand after 3 years of civilian life." Harrison nodded and moved to the spotting scope positioned next to the firing line. "We'll start at 600 meters and work our way out. Take your time. Get comfortable with the weapon system, and let me know when you're ready." Victoria settled into a prone position behind the rifle, feeling the familiar ritual of precision shooting beginning to take over her consciousness. The civilian world she'd inhabited for 3 years seemed to recede as her mind shifted into the analytical state that had once made her one of the military's most effective long-range specialists. The first step was establishing her natural point of aim, the position where the rifle naturally pointed when she relaxed completely behind it. This fundamental skill had to be perfect before considering longer distances or more complex scenarios. Victoria adjusted her position minutely, feeling for the spot where the crosshairs settled naturally on the 600-meter target, without requiring muscular tension to maintain alignment. The process was meditative, requiring her to tune out external distractions and focus entirely on the relationship between her body, the weapon, and the target. "Breathing looks good," Harrison observed from behind the spotting scope. "Natural. Respiratory pause, consistent sight picture. Take the shot when you're ready." Victoria's world narrowed to the essential elements of precision shooting: sight alignment, trigger control, natural point of aim, and the subtle environmental factors that would affect bullet flight over 600 meters. Her breathing settled into the rhythm she remembered from countless hours in hide positions across Afghanistan. Deep breath in, half breath out, natural pause, squeeze the trigger straight back with the pad of her index finger until the rifle fired almost as a surprise. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with satisfying precision, and Victoria immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round while maintaining her sight picture on the target. Through her scope, she could see the bullet impact exactly where she'd aimed center mass on the silhouette target with the kind of precision that indicated her fundamental shooting skills remained intact despite 3 years of disuse. "Dead center," Harrison confirmed through the spotting scope. "Group size will be more telling, but that's a good start. Send 4 more rounds." Victoria fired 4 additional shots, each one following the same methodical process of sight alignment, breathing control, and precise trigger manipulation. The mental routine was exactly as she remembered it, a meditative state where external concerns disappeared and her entire consciousness focused on the mathematical precision required to place bullets exactly where she intended them to go. 5 shot. "Group measures just under 2 inches at 600 meters, Harrison announced, lowering his spotting scope. "That's sub-minute of angle accuracy. Your fundamentals are solid." Victoria felt a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. 2 inches at 600 meters represented the kind of precision that separated serious shooters from recreational enthusiasts, and indicated that her muscle memory and technical skills had survived the transition to civilian life better than she'd hoped. "Let's move to 800 meters, Victoria said, feeling confident enough to begin pushing toward the distances where environmental factors would become more significant. Harrison adjusted the spotting scope and called out the wind conditions at various distances between the firing line and the new target. "Primary wind at the firing position is running 10 knots from 9 o'clock. Mid-range wind looks consistent with the firing position, but I'm seeing some thermal activity at the target area that might create vertical displacement." Victoria made the necessary adjustments to her scope settings, calculating the ballistic solution for the increased distance and current environmental conditions. The mathematics of long-range shooting were second nature to her. Bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature effects on muzzle velocity, and the Coriolis effect all had to be factored into the solution. The 800-meter shots went as well as the 600-meter group, with bullet impacts clustering in a pattern that would have been lethal on any human-sized target. Victoria felt her confidence building as the familiar rhythms of precision shooting reasserted themselves in her muscle memory and mental processes. "Impressive," Harrison said, studying the target through his spotting scope. "Most shooters who've been away from the rifle for 3 years would need several sessions to get back to this level of consistency." "Some skills don't fade as quickly as others," Victoria replied, but privately she was surprised by how easily she'd slipped back into the mental state that precision shooting required. 3 years of civilian life had created layers of psychological insulation between her current identity and her military past. But behind the rifle, those layers seemed to disappear entirely. "Ready to stretch it out to 1,000? Harrison asked. Victoria nodded, but before they could begin the transition to longer distance, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Marcus Webb's number, which meant either he had new information about their situation or something had gone wrong. "I need to take this," Victoria said, rising from the firing position. "Marcus?" She answered, walking away from Harrison to ensure privacy. "Victoria, we have a problem. I'm at the meeting location we discussed, but I think I was followed. There's been a vehicle parked across the street for the last hour. 2 occupants who don't fit the neighborhood demographic." Victoria felt her stomach tighten with familiar operational anxiety. If Marcus was under surveillance, it meant their adversaries were closer to identifying all former team members than they'd hoped. It also meant the meeting location might be compromised, creating a tactical situation that would require careful handling. "Are you secure where you are?" Victoria asked. "For now. But I think we need to change the meeting location. Somewhere more public, with better exit options and harder to set up surveillance." Victoria's mind immediately began running through alternatives, locations that would provide security while allowing for discreet conversation about sensitive topics. Public venues offered protection through visibility, but created challenges for discussing classified operational details. "The shopping center off Route 9 in Framingham," Victoria said. "Food court area, lots of foot traffic, multiple exit routes. Can you get there without leading your friends?" "I can lose them in traffic, but it'll take time, say 2 hours." "I'll be there." Victoria paused, considering their tactical situation. "Marcus, if they're running surveillance on you, they probably know about me too. We need to assume this is bigger than just targeting former team members for elimination." "Agreed." "Victoria, bring everything you think we might need. I have a feeling our conversation is going to change how we approach this entire situation." The line went dead, leaving Victoria with the immediate challenge of transitioning from training mode to operational readiness in less than 2 hours. She walked back to where Harrison was waiting, already formulating the explanation she would need to provide without revealing sensitive details. "I need to cut today's session short," Victoria said. "Something's come up that requires immediate attention." Harrison's expression suggested he'd overheard enough of the conversation to understand that Victoria was dealing with a serious situation. "You want to leave the rifle here? I can secure it until you're ready to continue training." Victoria considered the offer, weighing the security of leaving the weapon at a professional facility against the uncertainty of what she might encounter over the next few hours. The decision came down to a simple tactical question. Was she more likely to need the rifle immediately, or could she afford to retrieve it later? "I'll take it with me," Victoria decided. "But I'd like to continue our training session starting tomorrow if possible. I think I'm going to need everything you can teach me about complex engagement scenarios." "I'll be here," Harrison said simply. "Mrs. Price, whatever situation you're dealing with, be careful. People with your capabilities tend to attract attention from individuals who have their own specialized skills." Victoria packed the rifle and ammunition into the cases Danny Murphy had provided, her movements taking on the efficient precision of someone preparing for potential combat operations. The transition from training mindset to operational alertness was immediate and complete, as if the 3 years of civilian life had been nothing more than an extended period of dormancy. As she drove away from Granite Ridge, Victoria found herself mentally cataloging the resources she would need if the situation with Marcus escalated beyond intelligence gathering into active operations. The M24 provided long-range precision capabilities, but she would also need close-quarters equipment, communications gear, and possibly explosives depending on what they were facing. More importantly, she would need to reconstruct the complete intelligence picture surrounding their former operation in Afghanistan. If someone was targeting team members based on classified operational details, it meant either internal security had been compromised or their original mission had connections and implications that extended far beyond what they'd been told at the time. The drive to Framingham gave Victoria timed to shift fully into the analytical mindset that had served her during the most challenging operations of her military career. By the time she reached the shopping center, she was no longer Victoria Price, risk management consultant. She was Victoria Price, former Army sniper, with all the tactical awareness and lethal capabilities that identity entailed. The shopping center was exactly what she'd hoped for, busy enough to provide cover through crowd dynamics, with multiple levels and exit routes that would make surveillance difficult and escape routes numerous. Victoria arrived 30 minutes early and spent the time conducting counter-surveillance while studying the terrain and identifying potential threats. She positioned herself at a table in the food court with clear sight lines to all entrances, and her back to a wall that would prevent approach from behind. The rifle case sat beside her chair, secured but accessible if the situation deteriorated rapidly. To casual observers, she looked like someone waiting for a friend while enjoying an afternoon coffee. Marcus arrived exactly on time, approaching from the main entrance with the kind of situational awareness that indicated he'd successfully evaded his surveillance. He looked older than Victoria remembered, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But his movement patterns and visual scanning techniques demonstrated that his tactical skills remained sharp. "Good to see you," Marcus said as he sat down across from her. "I managed to lose my friends about 20 minutes ago, but we should assume they'll figure out I'm here eventually." "Then let's make this efficient," Victoria said. "Tell me everything about what's been happening, starting with Jenkins and Henderson." Marcus glanced around the food court, confirming that nearby tables were empty enough to prevent eavesdropping, then leaned forward and began speaking in the low, controlled tone of someone accustomed to discussing sensitive information in insecure environments. Jenkins died in what appeared to be a single-car accident on a rural road in Montana. Vehicle left the roadway at high speed, hit a tree, burst into flames. Local police classified it as driver error, possibly involving alcohol, but Jenkins hadn't touched a drink since his second deployment. Victoria nodded, remembering Jenkins as one of the most conscientious soldiers she'd ever worked with. The idea that he would drive drunk through mountain roads was completely inconsistent with everything she knew about his character and habits. Henderson's disappearance was more sophisticated, Marcus continued. Someone gained access to his home security system using manufacturer override codes, disabled the cameras and motion sensors, then apparently convinced him to leave voluntarily. No signs of struggle, but his truck was found 3 days later in a parking garage in D.C. with evidence suggesting professional surveillance equipment had been installed. "Government-style operation?" Victoria asked. "That's what I thought initially. But the more I've researched, the less convinced I am that this is official government action. The techniques are consistent with intelligence operations, but the targeting pattern doesn't match any legitimate security investigation I can think of." Victoria processed the information, her mind automatically shifting into the threat assessment mode that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments. Professional surveillance, sophisticated access to security systems, elimination methods designed to avoid official investigation. It painted a picture of adversaries with significant resources and specialized capabilities. "What about the other team members?" Victoria asked. "Sergeant Torres relocated to Mexico after his discharge. I haven't been able to contact him, but his family says he stopped calling 3 weeks ago. Lieutenant Morrison is supposed to be working private security in Iraq, but his company claims he never reported for his last rotation." Victoria felt her chest tighten as the scope of the threat became clear. 6 team members, including herself. And Marcus. 2 confirmed dead, 2 missing, leaving only herself and Marcus unaccounted for. The pattern suggested systematic elimination of everyone involved in their Afghanistan operation, which meant the threat would continue until it was either stopped or completed. "What was special about that operation?" Victoria asked. "Beyond The obvious classified aspects. What made it different from everything else we did over there? Marcus hesitated, glancing around the food court again before answering. That's where things get complicated. I've been doing research, trying to understand why someone would target our entire team 3 years after the operation concluded. What I've found suggests that target you eliminated wasn't just a Taliban financial coordinator. What was he? According to intelligence sources I've managed to access, our target was actually an undercover asset working for a private military contractor with connections to both the CIA and several Fortune 500 companies. The operation that killed him disrupted a complex arrangement involving mineral rights, infrastructure development, and regional influence that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Victoria felt the pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. Private military contractors, corporate interests, CIA connections. It created a web of competing agendas, where the elimination of a single individual could have far-reaching consequences for multiple powerful organizations. So we were used, Victoria said. We were used. And now someone wants to clean up the loose ends by eliminating everyone who knows what really happened. The implications of Marcus's revelation settled over Victoria like a cold weight. Being used as unknowing assets in a complex corporate intelligence operation was bad enough, but the systematic elimination of team members suggested their adversaries had resources and connections that extended far beyond typical criminal organizations. Do you have names? Victoria asked. Companies, individuals, anyone specific we can identify as being behind this? Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a manila folder thin enough to be discreet, but thick enough to contain substantial information. I've been putting together everything I could find about the original operation and the players involved. It's not complete, but it's a starting point. Victoria accepted the folder but didn't open it immediately. The food court around them continued its normal weekend bustle, families and shoppers creating the kind of background noise that would mask their conversation from casual surveillance. But she was increasingly aware that their time in this location was limited. The primary contractor appears to be something called Meridian Strategic Solutions, Marcus continued. They're a private military company that specializes in what they call complex regional stabilization operations. Their client list includes major mining companies, infrastructure development firms, and according to some sources, certain CIA front organizations. Victoria filed the name away for future research. Private military companies operated in the gray areas between legitimate government operations and purely commercial ventures, often taking contracts that official military forces couldn't handle due to political restrictions or legal constraints. What was their interest in our target? Victoria asked. Best I can determine, he was coordinating local opposition to a major copper mining operation. The mining rights had been purchased by a consortium of Western companies, but local tribal leaders were organizing resistance that was making development impossible. Our target was supposed to be facilitating negotiations between the mining companies and local leaders, and we killed him. We killed him, Marcus confirmed, which eliminated the primary obstacle to military action against the tribal opposition. 3 months after our operation, Afghan National Army units supported by Meridian contractors cleared the entire mining area using tactics that resulted in significant civilian casualties. Victoria felt a familiar sick sensation in her stomach. The same feeling she'd experienced when learning that intelligence reports she'd relied on contained deliberate misinformation designed to achieve political objectives rather than tactical ones. The realization that her precision and skills had been used to facilitate what amounted to corporate-sponsored ethnic cleansing was almost more than her professional identity could process. How many people died in the clearing operations? Victoria asked quietly. Conservative estimates suggest over 200. The mining consortium now controls approximately 50 square kilometers of some of the richest mineral deposits in Afghanistan, with extraction operations protected by a permanent security force that includes both Meridian contractors and sympathetic Afghan National Army units. Victoria opened the folder and began scanning the documents Marcus had assembled. Financial records, corporate filings, intelligence reports from various sources. The picture that emerged was of a carefully orchestrated operation where her team had been used as the opening move in a much larger strategy. Who else knows about this? Victoria asked. That's the problem. I've been careful about my research, but accessing some of this information required making inquiries that probably triggered security protocols. I think that's how they found me, and probably how they're identifying other team members. Victoria studied Marcus's face, noting the stress lines and the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. The man she remembered from Afghanistan had been unflappable under pressure, capable of providing steady support even during the most challenging operations. Seeing him this unsettled was almost as disturbing as the information he was sharing. We need to assume they know everything about us, Victoria said. Current locations, capabilities, resources, connections. If they've been watching you long enough to eliminate Jenkins and Henderson, they've had time to develop complete intelligence profiles on all former team members. Agreed, which means running isn't a viable long-term strategy. They'll find us eventually, and we'll be forced to react to their timing rather than setting our own operational parameters. Victoria appreciated that Marcus was thinking tactically rather than simply focusing on immediate survival. Their situation required strategic planning that would allow them to shift from defense to offense, taking control of the engagement rather than remaining targets. What kind of resources do we have? Victoria asked. Marcus reached into another pocket and produced a second, smaller folder. I've been preparing for this conversation for the last month. Financial resources, equipment caches, safe houses, and contact information for people who might be willing to provide specialized support. Victoria opened the second folder and immediately recognized the kind of detailed operational planning that had made Marcus an exceptional spotter and intelligence coordinator. Maps, equipment lists, financial accounts, communication protocols, everything needed to support extended operations against a well-resourced adversary. How much money? Victoria asked. Enough for 6 months of operations if we're careful, longer if we can generate additional income through freelance work. Marcus paused. I also liquidated some assets that technically belonged to the government, but were never properly inventoried after our discharge. Victoria didn't ask for details about the government assets Marcus had liquidated. The gray market trade in military equipment was a reality of post-deployment life for many special operations personnel, and she wasn't in a position to judge his methods given their current circumstances. Equipment? Small arms communications. Gear, explosives, surveillance equipment. Nothing exotic, but sufficient for most tactical situations we're likely to encounter. Safe houses? 3 locations across New England, 1 in Virginia, and 1 in Colorado. All secured under false identities with appropriate documentation and financial backing. Victoria was impressed by the scope of Marcus's preparation. The level of planning suggested he'd been anticipating this situation for months, possibly years, rather than simply reacting to recent developments. Who else might be willing to help? Victoria asked. That's more complicated. Most of our former unit members are either dead, missing, or trying to maintain civilian lives that could be disrupted by association with us. But I've identified several people from other units who have similar grievances against Meridian Strategic Solutions. Similar grievances? Other operations where teams were used without complete intelligence about their mission objectives. Meridian has a pattern of using military personnel as assets in corporate operations, then eliminating anyone who might become inconvenient later. Victoria processed this information, realizing that their situation might be part of a much larger pattern of abuse by private military contractors. If Marcus was correct, they weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were potentially part of a broader conflict between former military personnel and the corporate interests that had exploited their service. "Do you have a plan?" Victoria asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since sitting down, an expression that carried notes of the tactical confidence she remembered from their operational days. "I have several plans, but they all depend on whether you're willing to go fully operational again." "I'm willing, even if it means abandoning your civilian life permanently. Because once we start down this path, there's no going back to risk management consulting and quiet anonymity." Victoria considered the question, thinking about the life she'd built over the past 3 years. The civilian identity had provided safety and psychological distance from military service, but it had also felt incomplete in ways she'd never fully acknowledged. Behind the rifle at Granite Ridge, she'd experienced a sense of purpose and competence that had been missing from her corporate security work. "The civilian life was always temporary," Victoria said finally. "I think I knew that even when I was trying to convince myself otherwise." Marcus nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Then here's what I propose. We eliminate the immediate threat by taking out Meridian's operational leadership, starting with whoever's directing the cleanup operation against our team. Then we expose their entire pattern of operations, making it too expensive and politically dangerous for them to continue using military personnel as expendable assets." "That's not a plan, that's a mission statement. What's the actual tactical approach?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to the barely audible level they'd used during planning sessions in Afghanistan. "Meridian's primary operational center is located in a corporate facility outside Washington, D.C. Their senior staff includes former military personnel who understand operational security but still maintain patterns and vulnerabilities we can exploit." "You want to hit them directly?" "I want to demonstrate that eliminating former military personnel carries costs they're not prepared to pay. And I want to do it in a way that sends a message to every other corporate contractor who thinks military service members are disposable resources." Victoria felt a familiar surge of tactical excitement, the same sensation she'd experienced when presented with challenging targets during her military service. The prospect of shifting from hunted to hunter, using her specialized skills against adversaries who deserved whatever consequences she could deliver, appealed to every aspect of her professional identity. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" Victoria asked. "Fast. Every day we delay gives them more opportunities to identify and eliminate other former team members, and more time to improve their security posture against retaliation." Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. She checked it discreetly, then felt her stomach clench with fresh anxiety. "Your training location has been compromised. Recommend immediate relocation." J.H. Colonel Harrison's message could only mean that Meridian had identified her connection to Granite Ridge Precision Training, which suggested their intelligence capabilities were even more extensive than Marcus had indicated. "We need to move," Victoria said, showing Marcus the message. "They found my training location." Marcus read the text, his expression hardening into the focused alertness Victoria remembered from combat situations. "How long have you been using that facility?" "This was my first day. But I left the rifle there initially, then came back for it when you called. If they were watching the place, they saw me retrieve it. Which means they know you're operational again, and they probably have surveillance on this location as well." Victoria began mentally cataloging exit routes from the shopping center and defensive positions they could use if confronted. The food court's multiple levels and numerous storefronts provided both opportunities and challenges for escape and evasion. "Do you have a vehicle?" Victoria asked. "Rental car, parked on the north side of the complex. You?" "South side." We should. Separate, use different exit routes, and meet at one of your safe houses. Marcus nodded and gave her an address in western Massachusetts, along with detailed directions and recognition signals they would use to ensure the location hadn't been compromised. The exchange took less than 30 seconds, demonstrating the kind of operational efficiency that had made them effective partners during their military service. Marcus, Victoria said as they prepared to separate, "What's our rules of engagement for this operation?" Marcus's smile was cold and professional. Meridian Strategic Solutions has declared war on former military personnel by targeting our team for elimination. As far as I'm concerned, that makes them enemy combatants operating on American soil. Understood. Victoria rose from the table, casually shouldering the rifle case and beginning her movement toward the south exit. Her mental state was now completely operational, every sense alert for threats and tactical opportunities. The transition from civilian consultant to combat-ready sniper was complete. As she walked through the shopping center's crowds, Victoria found herself analyzing sightlines, cover positions, and escape routes with the automatic precision of someone whose survival had once depended on such assessments. The skills felt natural, comfortable in a way that her civilian life never had. 3 years of trying to forget. Her military capabilities had ended with a single phone call from Marcus Webb. Now as she prepared to face an enemy that had made the mistake of targeting people with her specialized skills, Victoria felt a grim satisfaction in returning to the role she'd always performed best. Professional, precise, lethal. The shopping center's parking lot was busy enough to provide cover for her movement, but Victoria still conducted a systematic scan for surveillance before approaching her vehicle. The discipline of counter-surveillance had become second nature during her military service, and apparently 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled those reflexes. Her sedan appeared undisturbed, but Victoria spent several minutes confirming that it hadn't been tagged with tracking devices or modified in any way that might compromise her operational security. The inspection revealed nothing suspicious, but she made a mental note to replace the vehicle as soon as possible with something less traceable to her civilian identity. The drive to Marcus's safe house took her through the kind of rural Massachusetts terrain that provided excellent opportunities for surveillance detection and counter-surveillance measures. Victoria used the time to mentally prepare for whatever operational challenges the next phase of their mission would present. By the time she reached the safe house, a modest farmhouse situated on several acres of wooded land, Victoria was fully committed to the course of action Marcus had outlined. Meridian Strategic Solutions had made a fundamental error in targeting former military personnel with specialized skills and legitimate grievances. They were about to discover exactly how expensive that error would prove to be. The safe house was exactly what Victoria had expected from Marcus's operational planning. A 2-story farmhouse that provided excellent sight lines in all directions, multiple escape routes through surrounding forest, and a basement that had been converted into a communications and equipment center that would have impressed most military intelligence units. Marcus met her at the door with the kind of security procedures that indicated his paranoia was well-founded. Recognition signals, weapon status confirmation, and a brief discussion of counter-surveillance measures during her drive to the location. Only after he was satisfied that she hadn't been followed did he allow her inside the house. "Impressive setup," Victoria said, examining the communications equipment and tactical displays that Marcus had installed in the basement. "How long have you been preparing this location?" "About 18 months. I started having concerns about our former operation almost immediately after discharge, but it took time to develop actionable intelligence about what we'd actually been involved in." Victoria studied the tactical displays, which showed detailed information about Meridian Strategic Solutions' corporate structure, personnel, and operational patterns. The level of detail suggested months of careful intelligence gathering using both electronic surveillance and human intelligence sources. "This is professional-grade intelligence work," Victoria observed. "I've been working with some former CIA personnel who have their own grievances against private military contractors. The intelligence community has been increasingly concerned about companies like Meridian operating outside traditional oversight structures." Victoria examined personnel files for Meridian senior leadership, noting several names she recognized from military service: former special operations officers, intelligence personnel, and logistics specialists who had transitioned to the private sector where their skills commanded premium salaries and fewer ethical constraints. "David Morrison," Victoria read from one file. "Former Delta Force, now Meridian's Director of Special Operations. I know this guy. Served with him in Iraq during my first deployment. Morrison is running the operation against our team," Marcus said. "I've confirmed through multiple sources that he's personally directing the elimination of former team members." Victoria felt a cold anger settle in her chest. Morrison had been a competent officer during their shared deployment, someone she'd respected for his tactical skills and leadership abilities. Learning that he was now targeting former military personnel for elimination felt like a personal betrayal that went beyond simple enemy action. What about operational security for their headquarters? Victoria S. Marcus pulled up architectural plans and security assessments on his computer system. Meridian operates out of a corporate complex in Reston, Virginia. The facility houses approximately 200 personnel, with about 50 being operational staff and the rest administrative and support functions. Physical security? Professional, but not military grade. Private security contractors, electronic surveillance systems, and access controls that would deter casual intruders, but not defeat determined professionals with specialized skills. Victoria studied the facility layout, automatically identifying potential approach routes, observation positions, and egress options. The complex was situated in a commercial area that would provide both cover and complications for any direct action operation. "What's your proposed tactical approach?" Victoria asked. "Precision elimination of senior leadership, starting with Morrison and working down through their operational hierarchy. The goal is to disrupt their capability to continue targeting former military personnel while sending a message about the costs of using us as expendable assets." Victoria appreciated the strategic thinking behind Marcus's proposal, but she could also see several tactical challenges that would need to be addressed. Eliminating multiple targets in a secure facility would require careful planning, specialized equipment, and possibly additional personnel. Timeline? Victoria asked. Morrison is scheduled to attend a private security conference in D.C. next week. He'll be staying at the Marriott downtown, with a schedule that includes several public appearances and social events. Victoria's tactical mind immediately began analyzing the opportunities and challenges presented by a target moving through an urban environment with predictable scheduling. Hotel operations provided excellent cover for approach and egress, but also created numerous variables that would need to be controlled. "Public venue operations are complicated," Victoria observed. "Lots of innocent civilians, multiple law enforcement agencies with overlapping jurisdictions, and security cameras everywhere. Which is why I need someone with your particular skills. Long-range precision eliminates most of those complications." Victoria understood what Marcus was proposing, but the implications were staggering. Conducting a precision shooting operation in downtown Washington, D.C. would represent an escalation that would attract federal law enforcement attention and potentially classify them as domestic terrorists rather than former military personnel defending themselves against corporate assassination. "Marcus, what you're talking about is essentially declaring war on the United States government. Once we pull that trigger in D.C., we become enemies of the state rather than just targets of a private military contractor." Marcus's expression was serious but determined. "Victoria, They've already declared war on us. Jenkins and Henderson are dead. Torres and Morrison are missing, and probably dead as well. How long do you think it'll be before they come for us directly?" Before Victoria could respond, the communications equipment in the basement began emitting a series of electronic tones that Marcus immediately recognized as an intrusion alert. Someone was attempting to penetrate the electronic security systems, protecting the safe house. "Shit," Marcus muttered, moving to a control panel and beginning rapid keystrokes that would initiate defensive countermeasures. "Someone's trying to hack our communications." Victoria felt her training kick in automatically, her mind shifting from strategic planning to immediate tactical response. If their electronic security was being compromised, it meant their adversaries had located the safe house and were preparing for direct action. "How long do we have?" Victoria asked. "Depends on their capabilities. Could be minutes, could be hours. But we should assume they know where we are and start preparing for contact." Victoria moved to the equipment cases she'd brought from her car, retrieving the M24 and beginning the rapid assembly process that would prepare it for immediate use. Marcus was simultaneously gathering intelligence files and communications equipment, preparing for rapid evacuation if their position became untenable. "Exit strategy?" Victoria asked. "There's a vehicle hidden in the barn, fueled and ready. Emergency route through the forest leads to a secondary road that connects to the interstate system." Victoria positioned herself at a basement window that provided overwatch of the primary approach route to the safe house. Through the rifle's scope, she could see approximately 800 meters of open ground that anyone approaching the building would need to cross. "Contact," Victoria announced quietly. Two vehicles approaching from the east, moving slowly and staying together. Professional spacing and movement patterns. Marcus joined her at the window with binoculars, studying the approaching vehicles. 4 personnel visible, all armed with what appears to be military-grade equipment. This is definitely not local law enforcement. Victoria settled into a shooting position behind the rifle, feeling the familiar calm that came with transitioning from planning to execution. The approaching vehicles were still within the effective range of the M24, and their occupants had made the tactical error of approaching across open ground that provided no cover or concealment. "Rules of engagement?" Victoria asked. "They're here to kill us," Marcus replied simply. "Defend yourself accordingly." Victoria confirmed her 0 at the estimated range, made minor adjustments for wind and environmental conditions, and settled her crosshairs on the lead vehicle. The approaching team was maintaining tactical formations, but hadn't yet identified her position, which gave her a significant advantage in the developing engagement. "First vehicle stopping at 400 meters, Victoria reported. "Personnel dismounting and taking positions behind vehicles. They're setting up for a coordinated approach." Through her scope, Victoria could see the approaching team's equipment and movement patterns, clearly enough to confirm they were professional military or law enforcement personnel rather than civilian contractors. Their tactical procedures and coordination suggested special operations backgrounds similar to her own. "These aren't just Meridian contractors," Victoria said. "Someone with serious resources and government connections is backing this operation." Marcus lowered his binoculars, his expression grim, "which confirms what I've been suspecting. Meridian's operation against our team has official support, probably through intelligence agencies that want to maintain plausible deniability." The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow. If their former teammates were being eliminated with government sanction, it meant the conspiracy Marcus had uncovered extended far beyond private military contractors into the intelligence community itself. "Contact from second vehicle," Victoria announced. "Personnel moving to flank positions on the north and south approaches. They're trying to surround the building." Victoria tracked one of the flanking personnel through her scope, noting their movement patterns and equipment. Professional-grade tactical gear, coordinated communications, and movement discipline that suggested extensive training and experience. "They know what they're doing," Victoria observed. "This isn't a hasty operation." Marcus was already moving toward the emergency evacuation supplies, gathering essential equipment and intelligence files that couldn't be left behind. "Can you provide covering fire for our withdrawal?" Victoria considered the tactical situation. The approaching team was competent and well-equipped, but they were operating in terrain that favored defensive positions and long-range engagement. Her precision shooting capabilities gave her significant advantages as long as she could maintain standoff distance. "I can delay them, but not indefinitely. How long do you need?" 5 minutes to secure essential materials and reach the vehicle." Victoria settled deeper into her shooting position, preparing for an engagement that would test every skill she developed during her military career. The approaching team represented the same professional capabilities she possessed, but they were moving across terrain that offered limited cover and concealment. "Marcus," Victoria said quietly, "once I start shooting, there's no going back. We'll be officially at war with whoever's backing this operation." Marcus paused in his preparations, understanding the weight of what Victoria was asking. Once they crossed the line from defensive action to active engagement with what appeared to be government-sponsored personnel, they would become fugitives from every law enforcement agency in the country. They made that choice when they started. "Eliminating our team," Marcus replied. "All we're doing is refusing to die quietly." Victoria nodded and settled her crosshairs on the lead figure advancing from the first vehicle. Professional distance shooting required the same mental state whether the target was an enemy combatant in Afghanistan or a government operative in Massachusetts. Sight alignment, breathing control, trigger squeeze, follow through, the Victoria's finger found the trigger as the lead operative moved into her crosshairs. Professional distance, professional mindset. But as she began her breathing sequence, something made her pause. Through the scope, she could see the man's face clearly, and recognition hit her like a physical blow. "Marcus," she whispered urgently, "the team leader." "It's Tommy Rodriguez." Marcus looked up from his equipment gathering, confusion crossing his face. "Rodriguez from our old unit?" "That's impossible. He was killed in that IED blast outside Kabul." Victoria kept her scope trained on the approaching figure, her mind racing through the implications. Tommy Rodriguez had been their unit's communications specialist, someone she'd trusted with her life on multiple occasions. If he was alive and leading an operation against them, it meant their entire understanding of the situation was fundamentally wrong. "He's definitely alive," Victoria confirmed. "And he's definitely leading this team." The tactical situation suddenly became exponentially more complex. Victoria couldn't fire on someone who'd been her teammate, but Rodriguez's presence meant nothing about their current circumstances was what it appeared to be. "Victoria!" Rodriguez's voice carried across the open ground, amplified by a tactical megaphone. "Victoria Price! I know you're in there. We need to talk." Victoria exchanged glances with Marcus, both understanding that their tactical situation had just shifted from combat engagement to something far more complicated. Rodriguez, knowing her exact location, suggested intelligence sources that went beyond simple surveillance. "I'm going to respond," Victoria called out to Marcus, then moved to a window where she could be seen while maintaining defensive positioning. "Tommy." "Rodriguez," Victoria shouted back. "You're supposed to be dead." "Officially I am dead," Rodriguez replied. "Just like you're supposed to be a risk management consultant and Marcus is supposed to be living quietly in Colorado. We need to talk about what really happened in Afghanistan." Victoria felt the foundations of everything she'd believed about their situation beginning to shift. If Rodriguez was alive and operating under official cover as a dead man, it suggested the conspiracy Marcus had uncovered was both larger and different than they'd understood. "What do you want?" Victoria called out. "To save your lives. And to stop the people who've been using all of us as pawns in a game we never knew we were playing." Marcus appeared beside Victoria at the window, his expression reflecting the same confusion and cautious hope she was feeling. If Rodriguez was genuine, and if his apparent death had been an operational cover rather than an actual casualty, then their entire tactical situation might be based on false assumptions. "We're coming up to the house," Rodriguez announced. "Weapons down, hands visible. If this is a trap, you'll know in about 30 seconds." Victoria watched through her scope as Rodriguez and his team began approaching the farmhouse with their weapons lowered but immediately accessible. The movement pattern suggested either exceptional confidence in their tactical superiority or genuine intent to negotiate rather than engage. "What do you think?" Marcus asked quietly. Victoria considered. "Their options. They could maintain defensive positions and treat this as an elaborate deception, potentially firing on someone who might be trying to help them. Or they could trust Rodriguez's approach and risk walking into a trap that would end with their capture or elimination." "Tommy Rodriguez was one of the most reliable people I ever served with," Victoria said finally. "If he says he wants to talk, I believe him. But we stay armed and ready." Marcus nodded, understanding that Victoria was making a calculated risk based on her assessment of Rodriguez's character. They moved to the farmhouse's front door, weapons ready but not immediately threatening, prepared for either negotiation or immediate combat. Rodriguez approached alone, his hands visible but his team maintaining overwatch positions that could provide covering fire if the situation deteriorated. His face showed the same weathered intensity Victoria remembered, but with new lines that spoke of stress and difficult decisions. "Victoria, Marcus." Rodriguez stopped about 10 feet from the front door, close enough for conversation, but far enough to avoid appearing threatening. "I know this is confusing as hell, but I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you." "Start talking," Victoria said. "The operation that supposedly killed me was actually an extraction. CIA wanted someone inside Meridian Strategic Solutions who could monitor their activities and report on operations that violated federal oversight requirements." Marcus stepped forward slightly. "You've been undercover inside Meridian for 3 years? 3 years of watching them use former military personnel as disposable assets in corporate operations that should never have received government sanction, including the operation that made you 2 targets for elimination." Victoria felt pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. What was our real mission in Afghanistan? Rodriguez's expression was grim. "Your mission was exactly what you were told. Eliminate a Taliban financial coordinator who was disrupting regional stability. But what you weren't told was that the intelligence identifying him as Taliban came from Meridian Strategic Solutions and was deliberately fabricated to eliminate someone who was actually trying to prevent corporate exploitation of mineral resources." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her record shot, the operation that had defined her military career, had been based on false intelligence, designed to benefit corporate interests rather than national security. "So we murdered an innocent man," Marcus said quietly. "You eliminated someone who was preventing American companies from extracting billions of dollars in mineral wealth from Afghanistan. Meridian provided the intelligence, coordinated the operation through official channels, and profited from the subsequent mining contracts." Victoria felt the familiar cold anger settling in her chest, but now it was directed at the people who had manipulated her skills rather than the targets she'd been assigned to eliminate. And now they're cleaning up by eliminating everyone who knows the truth, not just Meridian. There are people in the intelligence community who authorized the operation based on Meridian's false intelligence. They're as invested in eliminating witnesses as the corporate contractors are. Rodriguez gestured toward his team, who had maintained their overwatch positions throughout the conversation. My mission was to identify everyone involved in the authorization chain and build a case that could be prosecuted through official channels. But the elimination of your team members has accelerated the timeline. What do you propose? Victoria asked. We exposed the entire operation. Meridian's false intelligence, the government officials who authorized operations based on corporate rather than national interests, and the systematic elimination of military personnel who became inconvenient. Marcus looked skeptical. Expose it to who? If government officials are involved, traditional oversight mechanisms are compromised. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since approaching the House. Congressional Oversight Committee with members who have been investigating private military contractor abuses for the past 2 years. They've been looking for exactly the kind of evidence we can provide. Victoria considered the proposal, weighing the risks of trusting official channels against the alternatives of continued fugitive status or direct action against Meridian. What kind of protection can they provide? Full witness protection for everyone who testifies. Immunity from prosecution for operations conducted under false intelligence. And federal investigation of everyone involved in the conspiracy. And if the congressional committee is compromised? Marcus asked. Then we go to Plan B, Rodriguez said simply, which involves using your specialized skills to eliminate everyone involved in the operation, starting with Meridian's leadership and working our way up through the government officials. Who authorized it? Victoria appreciated Rodriguez's practical approach to the situation. Congressional oversight represented the best-case scenario for resolving their situation through official channels, but having a direct action alternative ensured they wouldn't be trapped if the political solution failed. Timeline? Victoria asked. Congressional hearings begin next week. We need to get you into protective custody within the next 48 hours, and we need to deliver every piece of evidence about Meridian's operations and government authorization. Marcus gestured toward the intelligence files he'd assembled. In the basement, I've got documentation of Meridian's entire pattern of operations, including financial records and communication intercepts that prove the systematic nature of their activities. Perfect. Combined with my 3 years of undercover intelligence gathering, that should be sufficient to initiate federal prosecution of everyone involved. Victoria felt cautious optimism, beginning to replace the tactical anxiety that had dominated her thinking for the past several days. If Rodriguez's proposal was genuine, and if the Congressional Oversight Committee could provide effective protection, they might be able to resolve their situation without becoming permanent fugitives. What about the other team members? Victoria asked. Jenkins, Henderson, Torres, Morrison. Rodriguez's expression darkened. Jenkins and Henderson are dead, as you know. But Torres and Morrison are alive and in protective custody. We extracted them before Meridian could complete their elimination operations. Relief flooded through Victoria at the news that 2 of their teammates had survived. The systematic elimination of their unit had felt like a personal failure, as if her inability to prevent the targeting had resulted in the deaths of people she'd served with and trusted. So the choice is federal witness protection or direct action against everyone involved, Marcus summarized. Essentially, yes. But I should mention that the direct action option has already been partially implemented. Meridian's operational center suffered what appeared to be a catastrophic computer failure last night that destroyed most of their operational files and communication systems. Victoria and Marcus exchanged glances, both understanding that computer failure was likely code for a sophisticated cyber attack that had crippled Meridian's operational capabilities. Who conducted the cyber attack? Victoria asked. Rodriguez's smile was enigmatic. Let's just say that Meridian isn't the only organization with former intelligence personnel who understand the value of information warfare. The implication was clear. Rodriguez's CIA handlers had initiated their own operations against Meridian, using the intelligence he'd gathered during his undercover assignment to target the company's operational infrastructure. "So what do you need from us?" Marcus asked. "Full cooperation with the congressional investigation, testimony about your involvement in the Afghanistan operation, and access to all intelligence files you've assembled about Meridian's activities." Victoria considered the proposal one final time, weighing the risks and benefits of trusting official channels versus maintaining independence. The congressional option offered legitimacy and legal protection, but also meant surrendering control over their situation to political processes they couldn't directly influence. "If we agree to witness protection and congressional testimony, what happens to our civilian lives?" Victoria asked. "New identities, financial support for relocation, and federal protection for as long as necessary. Essentially, you get to disappear. Again, but this time with government backing rather than just personal operational security." Victoria looked at Marcus, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. They'd both spent 3 years trying to build civilian lives that provided distance from their military service. The prospect of starting over again, but with official protection and the knowledge that their enemies had been neutralized, was both attractive and daunting. "Marcus?" Victoria asked. "I'm tired of running," Marcus said simply. "If there's a chance to resolve this situation permanently and legally, I think we should take it." Victoria nodded, her decision made. "Tommy will cooperate with the congressional investigation. But if the political process fails to provide adequate protection or prosecution, we reserve the right to implement alternative solutions." Rodriguez's expression was understanding. "Agreed. But I think you'll find that the evidence we've assembled is sufficient to ensure prosecution and conviction of everyone involved in the conspiracy." As Rodriguez signaled for his team to stand down and begin withdrawal, Victoria felt the tension that had dominated her life for the past week finally beginning to ease. The transition from hunted fugitive to protected witness represented a fundamental shift in her tactical situation, one that offered hope for resolution without requiring her to abandon the civilian life she'd worked to build. "One more question," Victoria said as Rodriguez prepared to leave. "What happens to Meridian Strategic Solutions?" "Federal investigation, asset forfeiture, criminal prosecution of senior leadership, and permanent revocation of their government contracting authority. They'll be out of business within 6 months." Victoria felt grim satisfaction at the prospect of Meridian facing the same systematic destruction they'd attempted to implement against her team. Corporate contractors who used military personnel as disposable assets deserved whatever legal and financial consequences the federal government could impose. As Rodriguez and his team departed, Victoria and Marcus began preparing for the next phase of their situation, transition from operational mode to witness protection, with all the challenges and opportunities that represented. "Think it'll work?" Marcus asked as they watched the vehicles disappear. Victoria considered the question, thinking about the complexities of congressional oversight, federal prosecution, and the political dynamics that would determine whether justice was actually achieved. "I think Tommy Rodriguez is still someone I trust with my life. And I think the people who used us as assets are about to discover that former military personnel make very effective witnesses when they decide to tell the truth." 3 months later, Victoria sat in a congressional hearing room facing a panel of senators who had spent weeks listening to testimony about private military contractor abuses and government oversight failures. Her civilian clothes felt strange after months of operational thinking, but her testimony was delivered with the same precision she'd once applied to long-range shooting. "Ms. Price," the committee chairman said, "in your assessment, how widespread is the problem of private military contractors using false intelligence to manipulate government operations?" Victoria leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying the professional confidence that had defined her military career. "Senator, based on the evidence we've provided and my personal experience, I believe this represents a systematic pattern of corporate manipulation of national security operations for financial gain. Meridian Strategic Solutions wasn't an isolated case. They were simply the most aggressive in using former military personnel as disposable assets. The senator nodded, making notes that Victoria knew would influence federal legislation governing private military contractors for years to come. Across the hearing room, she could see Marcus providing equally detailed testimony about his intelligence gathering and the systematic targeting of their former teammates. In the gallery, she spotted Tommy Rodriguez, no longer operating under cover but serving as a federal witness coordinator who had helped expose the entire conspiracy. His presence was a reminder that some operations achieved their objectives through legal and political channels rather than direct action. 6 months after the congressional hearings concluded, Victoria stood on a shooting range in Colorado, working with a new M24 rifle system under her latest official identity. The Federal Witness Protection Program had provided her with a new life, but hadn't changed her fundamental skills or professional interests. Her new civilian career involved training federal agents in precision shooting techniques, work that allowed her to use her military capabilities in service of legitimate law enforcement operations. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of trying to distance herself from military service, she'd found her most satisfying civilian work involved sharing those same skills with people who would use them responsibly. Marcus worked at the same federal training facility, providing instruction in intelligence analysis and operational planning to agents who were investigating the next generation of corporate contractor abuses. Their professional partnership had survived the transition from combat operations to congressional testimony to federal employment. The legal consequences for Meridian Strategic Solutions and their government collaborators had exceeded even Rodriguez's optimistic predictions. Criminal convictions, financial penalties, and legislative reforms that strengthened oversight of private military contractors. Most importantly, systematic protections for former military personnel who reported contractor abuses. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from Rodriguez, who now worked as a congressional liaison for intelligence oversight. The message was brief but carried personal significance that reflected their shared experience. New case involving contractor abuses in Africa. Congressional committee requesting expert testimony from people with relevant operational experience. Interested? Victoria smiled and began composing her reply. The civilian life she'd built in Colorado was satisfying and secure, but she'd learned that some skills were too valuable to keep permanently retired. When former military personnel were being exploited by corporate contractors, she had capabilities that could help expose and stop those abuses. Her response was equally brief. Send me the briefing materials. Some fights are worth coming out of retirement for. As Victoria returned to her shooting practice, she reflected on the distance she'd traveled, not just the 1,847 meters of her record shot, but the years of trying to escape her military identity. The crisis that had forced her to reclaim those skills, and the resolution that had allowed her to use them in service of justice rather than corporate profit. The distance between who she'd been and who she'd become was measured not in meters, but in the understanding that some capabilities carried responsibilities that extended far beyond individual survival. When people with her skills chose to stand up against those who would exploit military service for personal gain, the consequences could reshape entire industries. Victoria settled behind her rifle, feeling the familiar calm that came with precision. Shooting. Some distances could only be measured at the moment of impact, when training, skill, and purpose aligned to achieve objectives that seemed impossible from any other perspective. One shot, one kill. But sometimes, the most important targets were systems of abuse rather than individual enemies. And the most effective weapons were truth and testimony rather than bullets. The shot that had ended her military career had been taken based on false intelligence designed to benefit corporate interests. The shots she would take in her new role would be aimed at exposing and stopping those who would use military personnel as disposable assets in pursuit of profit. That was a distance worth measuring. That was a target worth engaging. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the distance, a story that took us from the precision of a sniper's shot to the complex world of corporate conspiracy and redemption. This novella-length adventure represents hours of careful writing, research, and narrative development to bring you the most engaging story possible. If this tale of Victoria Price's transformation from civilian consultant back to operational effectiveness captivated you, there's so much more to explore on this channel. We specialize in creating these detailed, novel-length stories that dive deep into military action, psychological thriller elements, and complex characters facing impossible situations. Don't miss out on future epic adventures. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to be the first to experience our next thrilling story. Each narrative we create is a complete journey. No cliffhangers, no incomplete endings. Just fully realized stories that will keep you engaged from beginning to end. Share this story with anyone who appreciates military fiction, precision shooting, conspiracy thrillers, or simply loves a well-crafted tale of someone fighting against overwhelming odds. Your support through likes, shares, and subscriptions helps us continue creating these detailed, professional quality stories.